God, only 40% believe in ghosts, a figure which some find to be absurdly contradicting.
Really doesn't make sense, because in order to believe in God, you have to have faith, which is belief in something you cannot see or prove. But we do have a lot more people drilling God into our psyche than we do drilling ghosts into our psyche.
The belief in God in itself assumes a belief in some sort of a spirit or a soul. Most people who believe in God, believe in a heaven, believes that your soul moves on to somewhere after you pass. So the fact that people can believe that and not believe that your spirit can, for whatever reason, decide to stay, be stuck here, and want to communicate with you, it absolutely blows my mind.
People view things where they need this within their life. That's our powerful force that helps to guide us. Might be viewed differently, but people reach out to that and they hold on to that. A lot of people have difficulty trying to understand, are there ghosts? Are there spirits that are lingering on this plane? Why is that happening? That's a hard concept to understand if you've never experienced anything.
I do believe religion still plays a large role in paranormal investigation. A lot of teams do use exorcisms, and they use blessings, and they often encourage their clients to pray. They will bring the clergy in to offer counseling and even spirit removal. I think that can be important. I believe that it can work, and maybe in some cases it doesn't work.
Still, the occurrence of paranormal activity in the religious doctrine is undeniable. Each chapter in many of the religious scriptures clearly detail what can only be described as a paranormal experience.
Regardless of your religion, it's difficult to find any written reference in any religious doctrine that doesn't specifically describe or base its point on the belief of contact with a spirit or an afterlife existence. The bottom line is that there is incredible similarities in the stories, and yet no one on either side is willing to step forward and make a connection.
Still, the popularity of belief in a Holy Spirit far outweighs the general belief in ghosts. The unusual balance of opinion can quite possibly be attributed to the very effect of religion itself.
You have to understand that most religions throughout history, especially the Christian religions, strictly forbade the attempted communication or interaction with any spirit that isn't holy. In the Middle Ages, you would have been hung, beaten, or shunned for even claiming to have seen a ghost, let alone hunting one. So as you can imagine, it really wasn't a subject that was open for discussion. And as a result, anyone having a paranormal experiences had two choices. You either say nothing, or you give the story the appearance of a divine intervention or religious experience. And this explains why so many stories during the Middle Ages were more religious than traditionally paranormal.
In 1487, two members of the Catholic Dominican order published one of the most famous medieval treatises in history, and in doing so, thwarted the investigation of paranormal phenomenon for nearly 400 years. The treatise was titled the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witches. And although the document was specifically aimed at witchcraft and not spirit hunting, the distinction between the two was not typically recognized.
The purpose of the Malleus Maleficarum was essentially to refute any and all arguments against the reality of witchcraft. The church at the time wanted the people to believe wholeheartedly that there were these evil creatures on the loose that would talk to Satan and steal your children, and that they were alive and present in society, and that they were a danger to everyone.
In addition to the propaganda, the Malleus Maleficarum was also used as a training tool for the town magistrates and contained detailed instructions on how to capture, convict, and kill anyone suspected of being a witch.
Now, obviously, this treaty had an effect on the people at the time. It affected the way they lived, the way they worked, the way they functioned on a daily basis, and it's not really hard to see the effect this would have had on the reporting or investigation of paranormal experiences during the time period. If you had experiences, if you saw a ghost or heard voices or footsteps or experienced anything unusual of any kind, you couldn't tell anybody. And for almost 400 years, anything paranormal would have had to have been hidden or lied about in order to avoid persecution.
But all of that changed in late March of 1848, when the unusual experiences of the two sisters would alter the public perception of communication with the dead for nearly 100 years. Catherine and Margaret Fox lived here in this small cottage with their parents and sister Lee in Hydesville, a small village east of Rochester, New York.
The Fox family started out as really kind of a quiet, unassuming, and relatively normal family. They were originally from Canada, and they moved down to New York State with the hopes of starting a new kind of life for themselves. But unfortunately, the house they moved into had a questionable reputation of being haunted.
It was at the end of a long winter and only weeks after moving in when strange manifestations began to occur in the Fox's home. Strange taps and rapping noises began to keep the family awake at night, events which were all too familiar to the cottage's former owner, Michael Weekman.
The Michael Weekman family, who owned the house in Hydesville prior to the Fox family, claimed to have experiences while living there too, and just like the Foxes, they claimed to have been woken up at night by loud rapping noises, and they felt cold spots throughout the house, and they even claimed to have been touched by an unseen presence. And these experiences were just too terrifying and too much for the Weekman's youngest daughter to handle, so they were eventually forced to move.
On the night of March 31st, 1848, the disturbances reached their peak. The family, scared and unable to sleep, searched the home relentlessly for the source of the noises.
The children in the other room heard the rapping and tried to make similar sounds by snapping their fingers. My youngest child, Kathy, said, "Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do," clapping her hands. The sound imitated, following her with the same number of reps. When she stopped, the sound ceased for a short time. Then Margaretta said in sport, "Now do just as I do. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, striking one hand against the other at the same time, and the raps came as before. She then said, "Oh, look, Mother, it can see as well as hear."
The intelligent responses of the entity prompted the Foxes to develop an audible code of communication, 1 rap for yes and 2 raps for no. It was these amazing events and their continued ability to allegedly communicate with the dead that not only lifted the Fox sisters the height of popularity and controversy, but also brought along the advent of modern spiritualism.
They brought spiritualism to this part of the world. Spiritualism was alive and well in other parts of the world. They just seem to bring it to life here. There have been times when they have supposedly been proven to be frauds, but whether they were frauds or not doesn't change the fact that they did get people thinking about things and how they work. Not just the fact that they're there, but why are they there? How are they there? What are the mechanics behind it? And that's what started the whole spiritualist movement as a religion.
In the few years following the Hydesville incident, a lot of things started happening. I mean, you had mediums that were popping up out of nowhere. Spiritualism became a religion, and seances actually became a high society function. And all of these things were changing the views and beliefs that the country had embraced for hundreds of years. It was a really significant turning point in our culture. And there were the Fox sisters right on top of it all, leading the way.
But the growing strength of spiritualism was not without limit. By 1885, the popularity of spiritualist belief was on the decline. Widespread claims of fraud caused a notable decrease in the spiritualist population and serious doubt in the minds of skeptics.
The spiritualists were losing the battle with the skeptics, and that was primarily due to the tremendous amount of fraud that was popping up all over the world. It was almost like an epidemic.
It was actually around the turn of the century that so much fraud came out. And I think that's what turned a lot of people away. People could start to realize that they can double expose their film and make it look like a ghost, and maybe at first it was accidental, but then they realized they could do it on purpose and scam people. And I think just the amount of fraud that was around at that particular time is what turned people away from it and really made it fade out for decades.
Back in the day, they would put on a big song and dance, and there's even reports of some of them, some of the most famous mediums. Back when spiritual, investigating and spiritual era really opened up, where they were actually swallowing cheesecloth and then regurgitating it at their high point of the seance, and calling it ectoplasm, and all these things kind of added to the crash of mediums.
In the late winter of 1847, a young spiritualist couple from the small town of Vienna, Canada, gave birth to one of the most influential minds of the 20th century. Thomas Alva Edison. In the early 20th century, spiritualism was in full swing and quickly nearing the height of popularity among the middle class and blue blood socialites. Having been raised in a spiritualist family and admittedly progressing in years, Edison's thoughts began to focus a bit less on the physical and more on the boundaries of mortality, an interest which was echoed in 1916 when Edison's friend and famed British physicist Sir William Crookes began experimenting with an increasingly popular pastime, spirit photography.
Sir William claimed to have been able to capture a human spirit on film, and although this was really somewhat of a controversial thing at the time, it was enough to pique the interest of a lot of his scientific colleagues, and not the very least of which was his good friend Thomas Edison.
Inspired by the British inventor and following Crookes' death in late 1919, Edison allegedly began development on what could only be described as an apparatus for communicating with the dead, or ghost phone as it was often called, a project which was described in the October 1920 issue of American Magazine.
The article was called Edison Working to Communicate with the Next World. It was an astounding endeavor of the time, and it was very mysterious, and only a handful of people knew anything about it at all. But because of Edison's reputation and his successes, there was a general confidence that if anybody could make a machine like this, it was Edison.
Although there was much speculation surrounding the matter, it was Edison's belief that if an afterlife intelligence could be captured on film, then it was quite possible that his ghost phone might actually work.
If our personality survives, then it is strictly logical and scientific to assume that it retains memory, intellect, and other faculties such as knowledge that we acquire on this earth. Therefore, if we can evolve an instrument so delicate as to be affected by our personality as it survives in the next life, such an instrument, when made available, ought to record something.
In the early morning hours of October 18th, 1931, Thomas Edison died, possibly taking with him the secrets of what might have been the most astounding invention in history, and leaving behind the continuing question of life after death. In 1941, 10 years after his death, Edison allegedly made contact at a seance in New York conducted by Scottish engineer and inventor of the television, John Logie Baird. According to first-hand accounts, Edison revealed to Baird that the plans for his ghost phone were left in the possession of 3 of his former assistants, and that the machine itself was built but never worked. Neither the machine nor the plans were ever found, making his ghost phone one of the greatest mysteries of the spiritual and scientific world.
Harry Price was not only an engineer and a writer and photographer, he was also probably the most controversial ghost hunter of the 20th century. And when he was 8 years old, he witnessed a stage performance by a magician and potion seller known as the Great Sequoia. And it was this performance that sparked his interest in unexplainable things and really shaped the work he would do later in life.
By the age of 15, Price had his first of what would be many encounters with the paranormal when he and a friend decided to investigate the rumors surrounding a local manor house in Shropshire County.
After hearing the rumors about this alleged haunted house and being the inquisitive person he was, he just wanted to find out if they were true. So like any curious teenager would do, he and his friend locked themselves in this house overnight to see if anything would happen. And they didn't see anything in particular, but during the night they heard noises coming from the upstairs room and what sounded like footsteps descending the stairs.
In an effort to capture the entity on film and prove the haunting, the pair set up a powder flash camera at the base of the staircase and waited for the sounds to reoccur.
Well, they waited for about an hour, and the footsteps eventually returned. And he flashed the camera and got the plate developed the next morning. And although the picture showed nothing but an empty staircase, the investigation was a very significant breakthrough to Price because that was the day that he considered to be his very first actual experience with a ghost.
Although he was unable to capture evidence of a haunting scientifically, the experience alone fueled his interest to continue his research and develop better and more efficient scientific methods of collecting and documenting evidence.
Harry was always looking for new experiences and different research subjects, and he was always experimenting with different paranormal phenomena, and the public opinion of what he was doing was usually skeptical at best, but It really